Chapter 16. It was 5:30 at the press club, and Quillerin was relating the story for the 100th time. All day Monday, the personnel of the Daily Fluxion had been filing past his desk to hear the details firsthand. At the press club bar, Odd Bunsen said, "I wish I'd been there with my camera. I can picture our hero phoning the police with one hand and holding up his pants with the other." "Well, I had to tie Narks with my belt," Quillerin explained. "When his head hit the tile counter, he was out cold, but I was afraid he'd come around while I was phoning the police. I'd already tied his wrists with my necktie, my good Scotch tie, and the only thing I had for his ankles was my belt. How did he know it was Narks?" When I saw that square face and those square shoulders, I thought of those pictures of robots, and I knew this man must be the artist. Painters, I've been told, always put some quality of themselves on canvas, whether they paint kids or cats or sailboats. But Coco was the one who made it all clear when he read Scrano's signature backwards. Arch said, "How does it feel to be playing Dr. Watson to a cat?" Odd said, "What about the signature? That's something I missed." "Coco read the signature on this painting," Quillerin explained, "and he spelled it out backwards. He always reads backwards." "Oh, naturally. It's an old Siamese custom." That's when I realized that Scrano, the painter of the triangles, was also O. Narks, the painter of the robots. Their painted surfaces had the same slick metallic effect. A few minutes later, the robot himself walked into the house and came at me with a palette knife. He would have got me too if Coco hadn't come to the rescue. "Sounds as if that cat's in line for a civilian citation. What did he do?" "He went berserk, and one Siamese flying around in a panic looks and sounds like a pack of wildcats. Zoom, screech, wham! I thought there were 6 animals in that room, and that fellow Narks was one bewildered guy." "So Scrano was a fake," said Arch. "Yep. There's no Italian recluse hiding out in the Umbrian hills," said Quillerin. "There's only Oscar Narks manufacturing triangle pictures for Mount Clemens to plug into his column and sell in his art gallery." "Funny why he wouldn't use his own name," said Odd. Then Arch said, "But Mount Clemens' last column said there wouldn't be any more stuff from Scrano." "I think Mount Clemens was planning to eliminate Oscar Narks," said Quillerin. "Maybe Narks knew too much. I suspect our critic was not on that 3 o'clock plane the day of Lambrecht's murder. I suspect he had an accomplice who used the plane ticket and entered Mount Clemens' name on the passenger list. And I'll bet that accomplice was Narks." "And then Mount Clemens took a later flight," said Arch. "Or drove to New York," said Quillerin, "in the mysterious station wagon that was parked behind the gallery in the late afternoon. Zoe Lambrecht heard her husband talking about it on the phone." Odd Bunsen said, "Mount Clemens was crazy to let another guy in on the plot. If you're going to commit murder, go it alone, I always say." "Mount Clemens wasn't stupid," said Quillerin. "He probably had a clever alibi figured out, but something went wrong." Arch, who had been hearing fragments of Quillerin's story all day, said, "What makes you so sure Mount Clemens was going to kill somebody when he went down to his backyard?" "3 reasons." Quillerin was enjoying himself. He was speaking with authority and making large gestures. "First, Mount Clemens went down to the patio to meet someone, and yet this vain man left his prosthetic hand upstairs. He wasn't going to greet a guest, so he didn't need it. Second, he did not take the flashlight, although the steps were icy and treacherous. Third, I suspect he took a kitchen knife instead. There's one missing." Quillerin's audience was hanging on every word. "Apparently," he went on, "Mount Clemens failed to take Narks by surprise. Unless he could surprise him and sink the knife in his back as Narks came through the gate, there was a good chance that the younger man would overpower the critic. Narks is a powerful-looking adversary, and it was one hand against 2. How do you know Mount Clemens went downstairs to meet someone? He had on his lounging coat. He probably had his top coat over his shoulders while waiting for Narks, then threw it off to get ready for action. Narks would unlock the gate, which swings into the patio, and Mount Clemens would be waiting behind it, ready to knife him in the back. He probably planned to deposit the body in the alley, where the murder would be blamed on a tramp. It's that kind of neighborhood. If Narks is as formidable as you say, said Arch, how did that fool think he could pull off the job with one hand? Vanity. Everything Mount Clemens did, he did superbly. It gave him an impossible conceit. And I think I know why he failed this time. It's only a guess, but here's how I figure it. When Narks was unlocking the patio gate, he was alerted to Mount Clemens' presence. How? He smelled that lime peel scent that Mount Clemens always wore. Crazy, said Odd Bunsen. Arch said, Narks might have gotten away with murder if he hadn't come back for those paintings. 2 murders, said Quillerin, if it hadn't been for Coco. Anybody want another drink? Arch said. Bruno, let's have 2 more martinis and a tomato juice. Make it 3 martinis. Here comes Lodge Kendall. Skip the tomato juice, said Quillerin. I've got to leave in a couple of minutes. Kendall was hurrying with news. Just came from headquarters, he said. Narks is finally able to make a statement. And the police have his story. It's just the way Quill said. Narks painted the Scrondo pictures. Every time he came to town, he camped out in Mount Clemens' vacant apartment, but mostly he worked in New York. He brought the stuff here by station wagon, posing as Scrondo's New York agent. Did he mention the 3 o'clock plane flight? Yes, he was the one who used Mount Clemens' ticket. Odd said, Then Mount Clemens, that hammerhead, let him in on the plot. No, Narks was innocent at that stage of the game. You see, he had just come to town with the wagon, and Mount Clemens told him to fly right back to New York to meet a big buyer who was due in unexpectedly from Montreal. Mount Clemens said he had just arranged this deal by phone, in Narks' name, the way he conducted all Scrondo business. Narks understood he was to hustle back and meet the Canadian in New York at 5 o'clock and sell him a flock of Scrondo paintings. It sounded logical enough to Narks. After all, he was front man for the operation, so Mount Clemens turned his own ticket over to Narks, drove with him to the airport, and saw him off on the 3 o'clock plane. How come Mount Clemens' name was on the passenger list? According to Narks, they barely made it to the airport by flight time, and Mount Clemens said, Don't bother to change the name on the ticket, just go directly to the gate and check in. He said he had decided to drive. He claimed he would start out immediately in Narks' station wagon, stop by Pittsburgh overnight, and arrive in New York Thursday morning. Quillerin said, I can guess what went wrong. Well, said Kendall, the sucker from Montreal was nuts about those triangles. He wanted all he could get. So Narks phoned Earl Lambreth and asked him to air freight some of the older stock that hadn't sold. That's the phone call Zoe overheard. Lambreth said he'd send them by wagon, but Narks told him that Mount Clemens and the station wagon were already halfway to Pittsburgh. Lambreth said no, the car was still there, parked in the alley behind the gallery. So Narks smelled a rat. Not until he heard the news of Lambreth's murder and realized Mount Clemens had lied. Then he decided to capitalize on it. He hated Mount Clemens anyway. He felt like a flunky, a robot, always carrying out the great man's orders. So he decided to hit him for a bigger cut of the dough that Mount Clemens was raking in from Scrondo sales. Odd said, Narks was dumb to think he could blackmail a sharp operator like Monty. So Mount Clemens laid for him in the patio, said Kendall. But Narks got the jump and grabbed the knife. Did he say why he returned to the scene? Mainly to collect some paintings that had his own signature on them. He was afraid the police might start checking. But he also took some Scrano pictures and was going back for more when he ran into Quill and that cat. Arch said, "What will happen to the value of Scrano pictures when this story breaks? A lot of investors are going to be jumping out of high windows." "Well, I'll tell you something," said Quillerin. "I've looked at a lot of art in the last few weeks, and if I had some dough to squander, I think I'd buy some nice gray and white triangles by Scrano." "Man, you're lost," said Odd. "I forgot to tell you," said Kendall. "Those triangle pictures were a collaboration. Narks says he painted them, but Mount Clemens designed them." "Very clever," said Quillerin. "Mount Clemens had lost a hand and couldn't paint. Narks had a great technique, but no creative imagination. Pretty slick." I'll bet a lot of artists have ghost painters," said Odd. "Come on, have another tomato juice," Arch invited. "Live it up." "No thanks," said Quillerin. "I'm having dinner with Zoe Lambreth, and I've got to go home and change my shirt." "Before you go," said Odd, "maybe I should explain about that lady welder and why I didn't get any pics last week." "No rush," said Quillerin. "I went to the school, but she wasn't there. She was home with a couple of sore flippers." "What happened?" "Remember that guy that fell and killed himself? The Bolton dame tried to save him. He fell against her hands and sprained her wrists. But she'll be back this week, and I'll get your shots." "Make them good," Quillerin said. "Flatter the gal if you can." When Quillerin arrived home to feed the cat, he found Coco sprawled on the living room carpet taking a bath. "Dressing for dinner?" said Quillerin. The pink tongue darted over white breast, brown paws, and fawn flanks. Moistened pads were wiped over velvety brown ears. The lustrous brown tail was clutched between forepaws and groomed with painstaking care. Coco looked surprisingly like a cat, and not the supernal creature who read minds, knew what was going to happen, smelled what he couldn't see, and sensed what he couldn't smell. Quillerin said, "They should have given you a headline, Coco. Cat sleuth sniffs out double murder clue. You were right every time, and I was wrong every time. Nobody stole the gold dagger. Mount Clemens didn't take the 3 o'clock plane. Butchie didn't commit any crimes. Nino wasn't murdered, and Zoe didn't lie to me." Coco went on licking his tail. But I still don't have all the answers. Why did you lead me to that closet upstairs? To get Minty Mouse, or to help me find the Garado monkey? Why did you call attention to the knife rack Friday night? Did you want me to know one was missing? Or were you just suggesting some chopped tenderloin? And why did you insist on going downstairs to that kitchen? Did you know Narks was coming? And how about the palette knife? Why were you trying to cover it up? Did you know what was going to happen?" Coco went on licking his tail. "And another thing. When Oscar Narks came at me with that blade, did you really panic? Were you just a scared cat? Or were you trying to save my life?" Coco finished his tale and gazed at Quillerin with a faraway look, as if some divine answer was forming in his glossy brown head. Then he twisted his lithe body into a tortured shape, turned up his nose, crossed his eyes, and scratched his ear with one hind leg, and an expression of catly rapture. And that is the end of The Cat Who Could Read Backwards.